The morning was quiet, the streets of Crestwood bustling with early risers heading to work. The jewelry store on the corner, an upscale spot named Sterling Elegance, was already open for business. Inside, the glass display cases gleamed under soft halogen lights, showcasing rows of elegant rings, necklaces, and bracelets. The staff moved with practiced precision, assisting the few customers browsing the store. It was just after 10 a.m. when Camille Henderson stepped through the door. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored navy blazer and slacks, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. Camille had come to pick out a gift for her mother's upcoming birthday, a diamond necklace she had been saving for. She smiled warmly at the clerk behind the counter and began to examine the glittering pieces on display. At the same moment, Officer James Calloway parked his patrol car just outside. A long-serving member of the Crestwood Police Department, Calloway was known for his no-nonsense approach to his duties. He stepped out of the car, adjusting the brim of his hat, his eyes scanning the sidewalk before moving purposefully toward the store. The owner of Sterling Elegance, Mr. Whitmore, had called the police earlier that week, complaining about a string of thefts in the area. Calloway had volunteered to keep an eye on things. As Calloway entered the store, he nodded briefly to the staff, his gaze sweeping the room. His eyes fell on Camille. She was leaning over one of the counters, speaking with the clerk. Her movements were slow and deliberate, but to Calloway, something about the scene seemed off. Camille pointed to a necklace inside the case, smiling as the clerk retrieved it for her to inspect. Calloway's stance stiffened. His years on the force had trained him to look for subtle signs, movements, expressions, body language. But in this moment, his instincts were clouded by assumptions. He walked closer, his boots clicking sharply on the tile floor. Camille glanced up briefly, acknowledging him with a polite nod, but Calloway's expression remained hard. He stood just a few feet away now, arms crossed, watching her every move. The clerk, sensing the tension, hesitated before handing Camille the necklace. Camille noticed Calloway's presence, but chose to ignore it, focusing instead on the necklace in her hands. She examined the piece carefully, her fingers tracing the delicate chain. "It's beautiful," she said to the clerk, her voice warm and genuine. That's when Calloway stepped forward, his voice sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the store. "What are you doing with that?" he demanded. Camille looked up, startled. "I'm looking at it," she replied calmly, holding up the necklace as if to demonstrate. Calloway's jaw tightened. "It's expensive," he said, his tone carrying an edge. "Do you even plan on paying for it?" The clerk started to speak up, but Calloway raised a hand to silence him. Camille set the necklace back on the counter and met Calloway's gaze. "I don't see why you're questioning me," she said firmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." But Calloway wasn't convinced. "Stay right here," he ordered, reaching for his radio. Other customers began to notice the exchange. A man in a suit paused mid-sentence on his phone, watching from the corner of his eye. A young couple whispered to each other as the atmosphere in the store shifted. Before Camille could respond, Calloway reached for her wrist. "You're coming with me," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Gasps rippled through the store as Camille resisted, her voice calm but firm. "This is unnecessary," she said. "You're making a mistake." Calloway wasn't listening. Within moments, Camille was escorted out of the store, her hands cuffed behind her back. Outside, a small crowd began to gather, some pulling out their phones, recording the scene. Camille glanced at the cameras, her expression unflinching. "This isn't over," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the situation. As Camille was placed into the back of the patrol car, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would not just change her life. It would challenge everything Calloway thought he knew about justice. In the small holding cell where she had been placed, Camille sat calmly, her mind working as she pieced together her next steps. She knew this wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about using her voice to expose a deeper issue. When her lawyer, Jonathan Reed, arrived, Camille was ready. Together, they made the decision to go public. Jonathan wasted no time, drafting a statement while Camille reached out to her network of community leaders and media contacts. Meanwhile, a customer from the jewelry store had already uploaded a video of the incident. Within hours, the clip began to circulate online, sparking outrage. It showed Camille, composed and respectful, being led out of the store in handcuffs while bystanders murmured in disbelief. The caption read, "Black woman falsely arrested for shopping." Back at the station, Calloway was wrapping up the paperwork for Camille's arrest when his commanding officer called him into a meeting. "There's a situation brewing," Captain Edwards said, sliding a tablet across the desk. On the screen was the now-viral video. Calloway frowned as he watched the footage. The murmurs of the crowd audible even through the device's small speakers. "What's the issue?" Calloway asked, his tone defensive. "I followed protocol." Edwards wasn't convinced. "You might want to take a closer look at the woman you arrested," he said. "Do you know who she is?" Calloway bristled. To him, it didn't matter who Camille was. The facts spoke for themselves. Or so he thought. But as Edwards continued to explain Camille's reputation and the backlash already forming, Calloway began to feel the weight of his decision. His once unshakable confidence wavered, though he wouldn't admit it. As the video gained traction, social media erupted with calls for justice. Hashtag Justice for Camille began trending nationwide. Prominent activists and celebrities joined the conversation, amplifying the outrage. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon national outlets were calling for interviews. Camille, with Jonathan by her side, agreed to speak publicly. Standing before a sea of reporters, Camille addressed the crowd, her voice steady, her words carefully chosen. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about a pattern, a system that continues to devalue and criminalize people of color. I was shopping, not stealing, but because of how I look, I was treated as a threat." Her statement struck a chord. People across the country began sharing their own stories of racial profiling, turning Camille's experience into a rallying cry for change. But for Calloway, the fallout was personal. Protesters gathered outside the police station, some holding signs that read "Accountability Now." Others chanted Camille's name, demanding justice. It was late afternoon when Jonathan and Camille arrived at the police station for her release. The crowd outside parted as they approached, applause and cheers ringing out in support. Inside, Calloway sat at his desk, staring at the file in front of him. He knew Camille was coming, and for the first time in years, he felt unsure of what to say. When Camille entered the room, their eyes met. She didn't speak immediately, allowing the silence to linger. Calloway stood, his hands resting on the edge of the desk. "Miss Henderson," he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Officer Calloway," she said, her tone measured. "Do you understand what you've done?" Her question was pointed, but her voice carried no malice. Calloway hesitated, then replied, "I was doing my job." Camille stepped closer. "Your job? Your job is to protect and serve, isn't it? Tell me, how did I threaten anyone in that store? What crime did I commit?" Her words were sharp, cutting through Calloway's defenses. He opened his mouth to respond, but no answer came. He realized for the first time that he didn't have one.